So glad I got your attention here. Thanks for clicking through and checking out this video. It's interesting, those of us that we consider ourselves spiritual people, we're often very empathic, very highly sensitive. And it's amazing how much that affects us in so many ways. And so obviously that's probably why you clicked through to this video, is that it's a challenge in your life. You find yourself at times probably picking up a lot of anxiety from others. Maybe some of it's coming from you, but anxiety can often be an issue for us. It often shows up as overwhelm. It often shows up as challenges to our personal power, where sometimes we feel on top of the world and really feel empowered and like we can do anything. And then moments later, we may come across somebody where there's a lot of pushback, we're feeling a lot of judgment, and we feel our personal power just drop right off. It feeds Imposter Syndrome, which is a really common term that's being passed around right now for that similar kind of feeling, where we don't feel like we can count on ourselves. We don't feel like we can trust ourselves to show up consistently in our power without the anxiety, without the overwhelm. And so I'm David Waldas. I'm the author of Insight, Influence, and Flow, the founder of Aligned Living, and that is the work I do. That was my experience in life. I was always reacting to my surroundings. I was always feeling overwhelmed. I was always had a high anxiety level. My power, my personal power, and my relationship with myself was always moving up and down depending on the situation. So if that sounds familiar to you, I'm glad you're here, and I'm excited to share some stuff. First, really looking at understanding a little bit from the energetic perspective, from our electromagnetic fields and the energy that we walk through in life. So I'll be sharing some tools as well from the Aligned Living System. It's made a massive shift in my life and how I experience reality, basically, how I experience interacting with others. And I hear the same feedback from others. It's so fun and just so exciting to see people having the same results that I have, and hearing them describe their experience with this work as looking at their life prior to Aligned Living and after Aligned Living, and it being a real kind of point in their life where the way that they interacted with people and the world and reality and themselves all went through a dramatic transformation. All right, so we'll start off with just sharing a little bit of what we are experiencing and my understanding of it. It's really cool that science is starting to be able to track our electromagnetic fields and how they affect us, how they affect others, the information that's actually being carried in this kind of wireless format, just simply our electromagnetic energy, that it actually carries a lot of information. There was this really fascinating study done at the ESADE school in Barcelona, Spain. It's a renowned business school. And what they were doing is they were trying to figure out what it is about leaders that makes them stand out, that makes other people want to follow them. So they created this experiment where they hooked up about 30 graduate students to EEGs and EKGs, and they monitored their vital signs. And then they put them in a situation where they were given case studies and grouped off, and they wanted to see what the traits were physiologically of the emerging leaders. And what they found was that in the first 20 minutes every time, they were going to be able to predict who was going to be the leader of the group. Not from watching them, not from charisma, not from somebody that's more dogmatic or pushy or just desiring to be a leader, but it was really about what was happening internally for each of the participants. And what they found was that whoever had the most stabilized internal system, meaning that their heart rate, their breathing, their sense of self was just settled in, their physiology was much more grounded within themselves, that those are the ones that emerged as the leaders. And something really interesting happened as well, that not only did those people emerge as the leaders, but the people around them, the rest of the people in the group, started to sync up their vital signs with the leader. And so it's really interesting if we think about that, if this is happening unconsciously for us all the time, where there's certain people that have learned how to stabilize within inside themselves. Maybe it's natural. Maybe it's about their ego. Maybe it's about the way their energy field is, that they're not referencing externally the way most of us as empaths and highly sensitive people do, but maybe they're referencing internally. And, it really doesn't matter. I mean, that was the first question I got is, if the people that are following are referencing externally and in training with that leader, what is the leader in training with? And the answer is themselves, or some sort of a higher sense of self. So when we think about that, and we think of our operating system as feedback loops, if these leaders are referencing themselves internally and then bring that self to the external world and letting the external world respond to that, it's like they always get to go first. It's like, I think about it like a chess match. If whoever goes first, everybody else is responding to those moves. And as empaths, as highly sensitive people, as spiritual, kind of more aware people, we tend to scan our surroundings. We tend to always be reading the way other people are showing up. And part of that is threat. Part of that is us trying to feel safe. Part of it is trying to navigate. Part of it is trying to kind of get a greater sense of self. But our feedback loop starts from the outside in. And when that happens, we're always at the mercy of our surroundings. And so think about this. How often do you try to set up your surroundings to make it more comfortable for you? How often are you really trying to push away what doesn't feel good, pull in what does feel good? And of course we want to engineer our life. Of course we want that to be creating a life that matches us. And at the same time, how often are we in experiences where that's not up to us? When we go to work and we have a coworker or a boss or family members or roommates or situations that we are in that benefit us in some way and have a certain cost. And just interacting in the world, going to the grocery store can be like this. And so really interesting, when our reference goes from the external in, we're constantly asking the world who we are. And my theory on this is that this started very young for us. People that are five sensory just have that taste, touch, smell, hear. Did I get all of them? That they know the world that way. And so as little babies, that they reached out to the world and wanted feedback about where am I, who are these people in my lives. And those of us that have this extrasensory ability, that I think empathy really is, it's a multisensory, a multidimensional aspect of self. A fifth sense or a sixth sense. We sent that out into the world as well. And what we found was a lot of feedback, a lot of information. And it was always about the people around us. And I'm sure we've all heard the saying, that it's not about you, it's about them when we're having interactions with other people that don't feel good. And while that may be true, for empaths, it always feels personal. It's so hard for us to tap into somebody's energy, feel what they're feeling, and feel it within ourselves, and for it not to feel personal. Even if they're having a conversation with somebody else, even if they're a block down the sidewalk, and it feels like it has nothing to do with us, logically, when we feel their energy, it does impact us, so it is personal. So as little babies, we sent our awareness out into the world, and we got used to getting that feedback. It's how we learned to navigate. It's how we created our self-concept. And it's how we've known ourselves, the world, and it's just our normal operating system. And for most of us, it's never occurred to us that at some point there was a choice. That we put that emotional body on outside, that extrasensory self on outside, and we've been reading our world ever since. And it's brought a lot of gifts, like the richness that we know the world, the depth that we know the world and the people around us. And it's come at a pretty serious cost. That our self-concept is often in flux, that we're often uncomfortable, that we're often experiencing anxiety and overwhelm. And so that gift, when we actually learn to control it, to go like, well, sure, it's on externally now, but I also have the ability to turn that off externally and turn it on internally. And that's a lot of what aligned living is based on, is the idea that we're actually in charge of that. It's just never occurred to us that we actually had control over it. I think it's helpful to think of it like there's cameras and microphones, and our emotional body is just out there reading everything, filming it with the cameras, the microphones recording it, but the speakers and the screen is inside of us. And so we're walking through the world where 90% of the information that we're getting about ourselves and about our interactions are reflections from others. Which means it's really about other people's stuff, which means that we're knowing ourselves secondhand. And the moment that we disconnect those cameras and microphones from outside, turn them off temporarily, and turn them on inside, that emotional body starts to read us with that same level of depth, that same level of richness. And there's this incredible quiet that shows up when we're in that state of consciousness. And that is the aligned living flow state that we'll be talking more and more about. When I first started working with clients, I hear from all the time about these fluctuations in self-concept, these fluctuations in feeling powerful, these fluctuations in overwhelm and anxiety and the imposter syndrome and all these things that we're talking about. It's so interesting. This one woman I was thinking of, that she was describing being at the grocery store and walking down the aisle and running into somebody from her hometown that had a lot of judgment for her. And she was just feeling kind of all the second guessing of self, and kind of the anxiety, the overwhelm was coming up, the sense of, not really feeling good about herself. And then she talked about walking around the next corner and running into another old friend that just adores her. And she's saying, she's like, it was the weirdest thing. I went from, feeling really down to being like, oh my God, I'm this amazing person that people love and support and want to be around me. And I feel so good about myself. And she's like, it was a matter of like 30 seconds. And I went from, oh my God, what's wrong with me, to like, oh, I'm such a beautiful person. And so I think those of us who are empathic know that experience, that fluctuation. And while that's an extreme version of it, we're always moving on that scale. Maybe it's the person at work that, when they're not there, we really feel powerful. People listen to what we're saying. And the moment they show up, they're shutting down energy, their arrogance, or, they're trying to one up, makes us feel anxious, and we have a tough time communicating. We have a tough time kind of really expressing ourselves. Maybe it's a sibling that does that to us, or for us, or with us, however we're going to look at it. And so I'm really excited to share more information about this, because once we're able to operate out of that, once we're able to take those sensors off of that person that's shutting us down and put those sensors on ourselves, man, it's so freeing. And it's really exciting to live from that place. There's a quote from Nikola Tesla that I'd like to share with you. And this is, I'm going to shamelessly plug my book here, Insight, Influence, and Flow. It really meant so much to me that I actually used it as a quote at the beginning of one of my chapters. And this chapter is on entrainment. And so here's a quote. The human being is a self-propelled automaton. An automaton is like a robot, basically, like, moving without thinking, basically. So the human being is a self-propelled automaton, entirely under the control of external influences. Willful and predetermined though they appear, his actions are governed not from within, but from without. He's like a float tossed about by the waves of a turbulent sea. That's from Nikola Tesla, 1915, February 7th, from his book, How Cosmic Forces Shape Our Destinies. So that really paints a bleak picture of humanity. And, I think that while that's absolutely true, that maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the moment we start operating outside of those external influences, it doesn't feel like an exaggeration. And so I think that Nikola Tesla was onto something. That guy had access to some really interesting information. And I really resonated with that quote, because when I see people operating in that empathic place, in our normal, just kind of default way of working with our gifts of empathy and our high sensitivities, it often is that we're in this turbulent sea that's knocking us around, and we're constantly in reaction, in response to. And so I'm really excited to invite you into this free video course that I've created to teach you some of the basics of how to disconnect from all that external chaos and connect with this internal, quiet, stable place, get to know yourself without all the noise. Because no matter how well we know ourselves, if we're tracking all that noise, there's just so much interference that the way that we know ourselves almost instantly, the way that we feel the clean clarity of who we are from this place, it's remarkable. So there's two important points that I wanted to just kind of step forward with, that while we're operating in that external state where we're referencing externally rather than internally, there's two really important things that we experience. One is we are always being massively influenced by our surroundings, particularly other people. When we're reading them, when we're externally referencing, that is our experience. It's always having an impact that's quite massive, and often we don't even realize to what degree. The second point I'd like to make is that the choices we make are often more about what others want from us than what we want for ourselves, and we usually don't even know it. And so this is that piece where there's this external influence happening, where we feel things that are really being pushed on us from others. And it may feel absolutely like, oh yeah, this is what I want, this is what feels good to me. And inside of that influence, that's absolutely true. And so we are following our truth. But what happens when we disconnect from that external influence? We're still reading it, still very aware of it. We're not going to turn the gift off completely, but really putting most of our awareness internally, that internal referencing, that we start to desire things a little differently. We start to want different things for our lives because that people-pleasing aspect of ourselves, or maybe the opposite is true, that we've been so frustrated by that push that we often have this tough time pleasing people. It's usually one or the other for empaths. And so when we operate outside of that, it really cleans things up, and we're able to operate much more in what we truly want rather than what we feel like we want in the moment based on the influence of our surroundings. So you'll see on this page there's a button where you can click through and go ahead and sign up for this free video class that will give you 3 more videos taking you through the aligned living system and the basics of it, and really give you the ability, like the response is right away. It's so fun. I recently went through and interviewed the last 10 people that I worked with. And I asked them 4 questions, and 2 of those questions were, why should people be doing this inner work? And more specifically, why should they do this work with aligned living? And the answers were almost identical. It was really cool. They said, you know what, I've tried a lot of other stuff, I've invested a lot in that maybe promised some future changes, or they saw a shift and then defaulted back to their old way. But it was different with aligned living. This worked. The results were, they started to be able to feel different almost instantly, if not instantly. The results stuck. They really started classifying their life as, this is how I experienced things before aligned living, and this is how I experienced things after. It became one of those big monumental kind of demarcation points in their life. Things like one of the clients was saying, it reminded me of that feeling when I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast. It opened up something for me, and I started to see things differently. It was that kind of a monumental experience. Or how life changes when we have kids, or we get married, or when we have that first intimate relationship that is really a deep connection with us. That there's certain standout points in our life where we've known ourselves differently after. And it's so exciting to me that is other clients' experience, because that's been my experience too. I was so empathetic. I was just constantly in that turbulence, tossed around by the turbulent sea, right, as Nikola Tesla says it. And when this came to me as a download, basically, I was almost instantly in this state of consciousness where I knew how to get here, I knew how to take people here, and absolutely I see my life as before aligned living and after. I just have a different reality. And so it just blows me away that by going through these simple techniques, these simple steps, that client after client is having the same exact results. And so excited to share this with you. Please go ahead, click through, join the free video course. And what I'm sharing here, I haven't given away as free. I've mostly been working with one-to-one clients or small groups. And hearing all this feedback, it really spurred me, this just has to be out there. It's so simple, it's so accessible, it's so reliable and repeatable. And so it spurred me to go ahead and create this free video course for you so that whoever wants access to it can have access to it. And so please do click through, enjoy. I hope it's a powerful, monumentally shifting experience for you.